let's do this. Okay, so the first question or the first thing that we ask of the three major decisions is intensity, and the next two are type and dual distribution. What's the difference between intensity and type? Intensity means that in a single channel, you have multiple outlets in the same channel system. And so retail, that would be how many different retail channels, or excuse me, retail outlets you would have to be able to get the same thing. And of course, we had the 8 major factors which come into the channel intensity. Channel type is different. Channel type is how many different ways in which you can receive. So online, shipped, okay, omni-channel, mail order, okay. These are channel type decisions. How many unique different ways you can have the goods shipped. So if we remember chapter 2 talked about market segmentation, and it talked about how we decide which target markets to go after. In this same kind of connection, this is what the channel type decisions is about. If I were to look at retail, if I were to look at online shipping, if I were to look at online pickup in store, mail order, call in, they actually still do that. Each of those channel types has a very distinct, unique way to select, purchase, order, and receive the product. Each one of those involves the 9 channel functions, requires the service outputs, and each one of those, in the way that we manipulate those service outputs, ultimately helps to decide whether or not we're going to use one versus the other. Each one creates a certain value. My dad held on to his old flip cell phone till he passed away. That's all he ever needed. He just needed service. He never tried to text, couldn't understand the rest, tried to upgrade him. My sister did, oh, brother. Tried to upgrade him to an iPhone, got frustrated and angry, went away. Each one has a unique set of abilities that different consumer groups desire. And if merch appears in different channel types, there's a greater likelihood that each one of those provides different unique service outputs. They perform different unique functions and probably at different unique price points. So the, oh gosh, which one is it? I forgot what they call it now. But the one that they use for people like my dad, which has this big friendly red button to call for service. Those have different functions. They perform at different price points, but one of those red buttons on your phone would be wasteful because you wouldn't need it. However, for those individuals who need it, it's a bargain at any price. Now, the reason that you expand those types is that basically it's there to cover the greatest segment of consumer market that you have, and each coverage creates greater variety. The other part of this it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have more customers, all right? It doesn't. But what it will do is provide greater satisfaction because it creates a better custom fit. And that's what it's supposed to do. Now, it is unavoidable that people are just not going to stay in their own lanes. Someone is not going to stay perpetually and buy online, pick up in store. Someone is not going to say mail order completely. Someone is not going to say phone. Nobody's going to say direct marketing. What's going to happen is you're going to find a certain amount of cannibalization. And cannibalization is where one channel will rob customers to feed another. That is basic. It is one of the things that we have gotten used to in channels, especially with the advent of omni-channel, where the consumer has a rich number of ways in which they can perform all 9 functions just to whatever their satisfaction is. I haven't written a check in maybe a year. And whether I'm doing it online or I'm doing it from my phone or I'm Venmoing or whatever, I mean, even though the check, I carry checkbooks. The checkbooks are at least, or the checks are at least 6 years old. All right. I still have that as ability for payment, but I'm still not using it. That's because the online services have cannibalized the direct services. But it doesn't mean that it isn't created value. As a matter of fact, as I've said, it expands the value, and the variety creates positive side effects. The consumer is more satisfied and more in tune to greater options rather than fewer. Eventually, you might get to a point of diminishing returns, but at this point, it doesn't seem like it. It seems like consumers have been very happy with the expansion. Now, the positive side effects also have certain negative benefits in that consumers cherry pick. So what does cherry picking mean? It means exactly that. If you use the services of one channel and then you also use the services of another channel, the central focus of the issue with that is it's very difficult to trace equity. Okay, remember the equity principle says an honest day's work for an honest day's pay. Well, how do we know? We have a lot of cross pollution, especially with the omni-channel, where consumers start out on their phones. They may go to the store to actually look at it. They may actually go online to buy it, and they may pick it up in the store to get it. Those are the difficulties that you have. Customers use the web to negotiate. Some stay away from it completely. It might increase the pie if you add online distribution. And the pejorative word is if. Without necessarily taking business away from existing channels, but the answer is maybe. All right. The rule of thumb is that consumers will exploit channels given the opportunity. And you know what? Why not? Okay. More choices generally are better. Remember this, that the 9 channel functions are required to be performed by channel members. When it comes to the channel type decision, you must choose the type first, then you can choose the channel members. It makes no sense to choose channel members if you're deciding to build an online channel if those individuals do not have access or the ability to do that. Simple as that. You got to put the cart before the horse. Or you put the cart before the horse. So you don't have to know this part, the screening process. You can ignore this. Just know that you have to choose the type first, then ultimately you can choose the members to perform those functions. Okay, so channel type is not a big thing to understand. The big thing, of course, that you need to remember is that it broadens out the number of users. The difficulty is that it may not expand the market. Also remember that it hopefully is segmented on greater number of individuals. It creates equity issues and pollution, but otherwise consumers like it. They create greater value. So the last is dual distribution. So in the 80s, when my friends were shopping for their houses, I don't know whether you knew this or not, but North Carolina was the #1 stop for shopping furniture in the United States. We're talking almost 100 years. I'm telling you the truth. Of course, this is the 80s. The internet was not there, but the manufacturers in North Carolina sent catalogs all across the United States. My friends would find what furniture they wanted. They'd get entire 18-wheelers coming with their entire houses at one time. North Carolina, by the way, I have several vendors that I've worked with downstream who I did interns for down in Lenore. There are still distributors down there that routinely go to Florida every year. They still do it. And it's just known as a location. Now, one of the things that Broyhill and all the others did is they had storefronts. They actually had storefronts, factory stores built right on to the warehouses and where they were making them. All right. This is dual distribution. And so what dual distribution means is that as a manufacturer, I have this, I have my wholesalers, I have my retailers, finally to the end user. Dual distribution means I also sell directly to the end user. Dual distribution means that you go to the market through both third party and your own spit out, Dave, your own distribution divisions. So you have a traditional channel, you have direct. It's literally as if you have both horizontal and vertical markets at the same time. Without even speaking, if you've been thinking about channels, probably not, but if you have been, you can see right off that you've got an issue with this, okay? Think about if I'm a wholesaler and a retailer and I'm selling my goods, then all of a sudden the manufacturer is selling direct as well. There's an imperceptible conflict there that, yes, this will probably be even an essay question. So when third parties compete against each other, I have big dealers, I have small dealers. The big dealers naturally, by the small dealers, are assumed to have more power than they do. Why not? They have a greater margin, okay? The small dealers are probably getting reduced margins. The large dealers are getting larger ones. However, in this instance, the manufacturer can at least say that they're neutral, that it's just the way they're doing business. Not only that, but when there comes to be any confrontation that can happen between these two channel members, the manufacturer can be thought of as a neutral party. In dual distribution, the manufacturer competes against his channel partners. Here's the big phrase that's important for you to remember. In dual distribution, the manufacturers claim to neutrality is no longer valid. Manufacturer can no longer have a valid claim for neutrality. The manufacturer has a skin in the game. The manufacturer is now a partner. They're a player. And naturally, you feel like those individuals will be given greater preference. And so this is the major problem. This is the third decision, whether the manufacturer will sell directly to customers and compete directly against their channel partners. But there are instances where it can occur, and there are good reasons for it. So back in the 80s, in 1986, the Communication Act of 1986 required that AT&T would have to sell its equipment to third party. Before 1986, American Telephone and Telegraph was a monopoly in the United States, a regulated one. It meant that they were the single sole source of all communications in the United States. They sold all the equipment. The equipment actually was not sold, it was leased to individuals. And so that meant that every phone in the United States was owned by AT&T, and you paid a lease on every monthly bill. 1986, all of that changed. It required AT&T to break up their organization. So in other words, the South Central Bell, Philadelphia Bell, Bell of Pennsylvania, all of those Bell systems had to become individual entities, and they had to start selling their own equipment. What you found, of course, naturally what happens is that you saw a bunch of entrepreneurs spinning off. They started buying AT&T systems. They started writing their own software because communication at that time was just very much the same, and started creating their own stuff. This is what became known as value-added resellers, VARs. They had their own employees. They could become authorized dealers. Here's the thing, was that AT&T started to get back in the business as well. Well, the problem with that is after a decade is that the value-added resellers had a pretty strong connection to their customers. They added value by having better relationships with the end users. And ultimately what that meant was that the tug of war between AT&T and the value-added resellers created a certain amount of dysfunctional conflict, but somehow they learned to get along. Fascinating, fast forward, the internet came along in 2001. In 1996, I saw this demonstration of a program called Net to Phone, which meant that you could get dial-up internet and call Copenhagen on the internet and spend no money. And you could just see the future. The writing was on the wall. And so in the 2000s, once you had high-speed internet, DSL come out, ISDN2, and then locked lines together, the world changed forever. It's fascinating stuff. Anyway, enough of my early life. So there are reasons why. And this is the reason why Broyhill had this. One of the major reasons why is what's known as the demonstration argument. Quite simply, as a vendor, you may not have the resources to display particular products in their best light without spending a lot of money. Company outlets show the independent channels the brand's ultimate potential and how the best way that they can sell it. And so beyond customers coming there, you can see vendors coming there as well, seeing what a full mock-up looks like. And this helps manufacturers because it makes sure that the vendors can maximize the selling points. There's the other thing. Remember from chapter 4 on vertical integration, performance ambiguity states that many times the manufacturers quite simply don't know how well the products are doing. So how do you find out? Well, the only way to do it is to be where your consumers are. And so for the manufacturers to have a greater understanding of their target market, they will create a demonstration store, and the demonstration store better helps them connect one-on-one with their consumers. You also find this in items that are exclusive or luxury items as well. Watches is one of those classic examples. The amount of money that you can spend on a watch is just ridiculous. Swatch is a particular brand that starts as a very simple $20 watch all the way up to a Brulee, which can be $250,000. It's a lot of money on a watch, okay? You need those stores to be able to show where the top of the line is and ultimately how far you can go. And so this is one reason why. Now, there's one other thing that kind of falls into the dual distribution argument, but it's actually dual distribution, not just for you, but for another manufacturer. So, there's what's known as the rider-carrier relationship. Okay. So the rider-carrier relationship. The carrier is a manufacturer with excess distribution capacity. Rider is a manufacturer without an existing channel into a market. So, an example, if I'm a drug manufacturer like Pfizer. So Pfizer makes pharmaceutical medicines. They all make off-counter medicines as well. They have access, of course, anywhere in the United States, North and South America. However, they want to expand the kinds of things that they sell. I'm a corporation in India, and I make homeopathic medicines, ginsengs, teas, tinctures, lots of different off-counter things that are unique, that may not have access here to the United States. How do they get to the US? It requires years. You have to get import licenses. A lot of work has to be done in terms of developing the market channel. Think about it. The channels is the most difficult thing to be able to do. Just think about all the partnerships and everything else that you have to line up to be able to get into an existing system. However, I can go to Pfizer and say this: I would like to have our goods on your truck at the same time that you go to every CVS and Walgreens in the United States. Everything that you sell of ours, we will give you a royalty on each one of those individual items. Now look what it does for Pfizer. It expands the product lines that they can offer. They do not have to do anything when it comes to putting together the products, any of the other things at all. All they have to do is promote and place it. If that line fails, it doesn't necessarily impact upon Pfizer at all. But what it does is it builds the brand. For the rider, it means that they can get into the United States. They can do it for a reasonable fee. This is all known as the concept of piggybacking. If you see a question known as piggybacking, this is what it is. Now, one of the keys about making this work is that the different corporations have to be in simpatico. In other words, they have to be in the same industry. You know, Pfizer isn't going to be selling Indian beer, all right? It would be pharmaceuticals or products similar to that line. Now, there's one more thing to be said about this, and it's a concept known as reciprocal piggybacking. And this is where two manufacturers share each other's channels. Two manufacturers share each other's channels. So, what's an example of this? Once again, we have to go under the assumption that they're in the same industry. So the early 90s come along, Bandai invests in these secondhand videos, add a few American characters, and they come up with the concept of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. It explodes overnight. It is like fire in a month, okay? Demand is just ridiculous, especially for, of course, the action figures and the merchandise. Bandai is desperately looking for a way to get into the United States. I bought the 5 characters for my son for Christmas. They had 512 stickers I had to put on. I worked from midnight to 5 to put those stupid stickers on. So he still has them, by the way. I have them in a box for him. Someday he'll want them again. Anyway, so Bandai has got to find their way into the US. What can we do? So they go on Mattel Incorporated, knock on Mattel's door and says, we got to find our way into the US. How do we do this? Mattel Toys comes along and says, you know what? We've been trying to get into the Asian market for years. Let's make a deal. And so this is what happens. Bandai signs Mattel off as their exclusive distributor in North and South America, and they make a killing. Mattel finally gets access to South Korea, Japan, China, Indonesia, and Australia, and they make a killing. Fast forward another decade, Mattel has a factory now in Japan. It's a win-win situation. And so that is what reciprocal piggybacking is. And that's how enormously successful it can be if you do it right. All right. Last thing is, how do we close channel gaps? So we talked about the channel gaps. Channel gap is all about producing a channel that meets the service output demands at the minimum cost. But how do we close those gaps? What are the strategies that we have in order to achieve this? To close service gaps, remember, service supplied is greater or less than the service demanded. We have 3 options at our fingertips. The first is we can expand or retract the level of service outputs provided. And so we do not need a blockbuster to be able to get all of the things that we need. We're providing more service than we actually need. Not only that, But there are certain things such as spatial convenience that consumers consider more valued than just simply the access to a store that has everything. And so the way you do that is you increase or decrease the service depending on the type of gap it was. And so instead of having one single store in a town, or maybe two at the max, you have red boxes everywhere. And in some places you have two red boxes. That decreases the service output of variety, but increases the service outputs of spatial convenience. It's a win situation. If you do not want that, if you have an investment in many things that consumers consider valuable, you can offer a menu of service outputs. This allows you to continue to service a multiple group of segments. Some of them may not be profitable at all, but you continue to do that because the overall form of showing that you're having a large service is greater value than shrinking. Sometimes you do these things, just the perception is better. So you offer a menu of these things. Walmart, over the last decade and a half, especially when it comes online, they first tried to come out with smaller stores, believe it or not, like Dollar General. They took a bath on it because they can't compete at that level. So instead, what they did was they ripped everything up. They started over again. They started investing online. We start talking about chapter line. I'll talk about the omni-channel and all the things that Walmart has done then. But basically what you do is you broaden the number of service output levels that you have. It means that you have a greater number of market segments that are happy. The next is that you modify or fine-tune the segmented target. You differentiate elements, you get smaller and narrower and more defined on those particular segments, especially if it's a niche market, so that you're fine-tuning demands that consumers desire. One more thing on that menu, I was reading this in the trade journal. Walmart is asking its employees who of them would like to become what's known as Walmart Local. So Walmart is starting to talk about local delivery across the United States, doing that within the Walmart stores versus having a DoorDash or somebody else do that, which I find to be interesting. It's also interesting to me because it's kind of consistent with what Amazon is doing as well. It's just one more way that they're trying to differentiate and make the service, fine-tune the service outputs. Finally, how do we close cost gaps? One of the ways that you close the cost gaps is you change the roles of the channel members. You combine more than one service output with a given member. And so one member does two or three things. The next thing you do is you invest in new distribution technologies, which are vitally important. And just remember this, that the cost can maybe sometimes be prohibitive, but you got to move in that direction. This is where online, bill pay, and all of the others are at their really best. The other is, finally, is you can introduce a new distribution function specialist. In other words, here we go again. Remember, a specialized channel is a more efficient channel. The more specialists you have in there, the greater the efficiencies you have. So I'm with the Blue Ridge Community Theater. We're going to do the War of the Worlds on Halloween night. We're using an online service to do ticketing processes. Makes it a lot easier for us instead of trying to go out and have places in every store that sell tickets. It's just better. One caveat in all of these is you have to be careful not to close the wrong gap. You must have an intimate understanding of what gaps that consumers are concerned with. And this is the example in the 90s where there was a slump in the record industry, and they thought it was because that the prices of CDs were too high, when as consumers just wanted singles instead of albums. I don't know why they didn't recognize singles were a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it went out of existence, and surprise, you're making less money. Anyway, they're geniuses. So anyway, they decided to cut the prices of CDs. The music industry revenues fell by 20%, and they're left scrambling until the Lord brought Napster along and showed them that digital singles were sellable, and the rest we know is history. There's a reason iTunes, by the way, iTunes was the most profitable thing that Apple ever did. iTunes in the first year cleared $1 billion. I'm not talking about their prices or anything like that. I'm talking about in pure profit. They cleared $1 billion. It just shows you, it's proof that there was pent-up demand that needed to be satisfied. Excuse me, 2 more slides, I forgot. Just realize this is that some boundaries can never be crossed. That environmental and managerial bounds many times just simply can't be changed. When the giant container ships were stacked off the West Coast, and it just came down to the physical limitation of being able to empty those containers, there's nothing you could have done about it. And you're always nailing down one particular thing, that this stuff costs money. The channels always cost money, and you've got to make sure you invest your dollars wisely. And so that is the salient issue about closing the gaps. This last slide, I would like you, you'll see this on an essay question. I want you to recognize that these decisions in designing channels is an iterative process, which means that it is not a destination, it's a journey, a constant redefining process. You think of the end user, do a make or buy analysis, decide whether you're willing to make the choice to do the make decision. You start from the buy. Decide in the channel intensity, how many outlets in a given channel, how many unique types of channels, whether or not you will distribute, whether you satisfy the demonstration argument or whatever. And then you work on closing your gaps, your service gaps and your cost gaps. And you start the whole process over and over again, because as we know, time does not stand still. And the smart channel expert is always looking where the future is, because the future is about to run you over if you're not careful. And we are done. And so, remind yourself, no class on Thursday. The test will be Tuesday the 10th, next week. And if any of you have anything, please just email me, and y'all have a great rest of the week. Thank you.